The federal government's extension today of the JobKeeper wage subsidy for businesses damaged by the pandemic and the boosted dole staying in place, at least for the time being, shows the length and the depth of the economic slump that we're now in. Make no mistake, this continuation of a debt-fuelled cash splash, at least until March next year, suggests that far from just hibernating, as the PM liked to once call it, many businesses and potentially millions of jobs are now on long-term life support. How long can this last? How long can the government, that's to say taxpayers, you and me, keep supporting jobs that the economy can't sustain? Well, the advocates of the so-called modern monetary theory, the belief that governments can create money indefinitely, well, they'd say forever. But in the real world, where families and businesses can't spend what they haven't got or can't sustainably borrow, there has to be a limit to government's ability to generate wealth out of thin air, because sooner or later, people will lose faith in the currency. Now, I totally accept that the government needed to lock down hard against this virus, particularly when the virulence was unknown at the start. And of course, the government had to support the businesses and jobs government policy had forced to close down. But let's be under no illusion about the scale of what's happening here. Eye-watering, that's the phrase the Treasurer himself used this week, which shows that Josh Frydenberg is even admitting that the debt and deficit figures that we'll see on Thursday when he announces them will be mammoth. This year's deficit is tipped to be close to $100 billion. Next year, close to $200 billion. That's 4 times the deficit Kevin Rudd racked up responding to the GFC. Now, while it's the Commonwealth that's been required to safeguard our wealth, it is, of course, the states that have been in charge of managing our health. And that split in responsibilities is, of course, one of the reasons that's bedeviled this whole policy response to the pandemic in the first place. Obviously, this extension of wage subsidies and dole supplements is taking place in the shadow of a second wave pandemic, all because Victoria failed to manage its quarantine hotels. It's the almost unimaginable negligence of one state that has vastly deepened the financial mess that the whole country now finds itself in. Still, at least the extended JobKeeper and JobSeeker payments announced today are better than the original versions. The first version of JobKeeper left nearly 1 million workers earning much more from the government than their normal wage. Now, part-time workers will rightly get less than those working full-time. The first version of JobSeeker, it was so generous that businesses found it hard to recruit staff, even with more than 1.5 million people unemployed. And now those on JobSeeker, that's the double dole, they'll have to apply for 4 jobs a month and take any reasonable offer if it's offered to them, reasonable job. Now, 1 application per week is hardly high-intensity job search, but it's not at least against the very poisonous something-for-nothing mentality that was starting to creep in. Now, it's a pity that these flaws, fairly obvious I have to say from the beginning, were built into the system. But it's also fair enough that we accept in their rush to get support out the door that the haste forced some mistakes from the government. With the costs of this pandemic growing more and more gargantuan by the day, and that exact cost, of course, we'll know on Thursday, surely this just underscores why all of us have to do whatever we can to beat it as soon as humanly possible. Which brings me to the subject of masks. Now, I can understand people's preference not to wear them. I don't want to wear one. I also know the fact that we've had so much contradictory advice on masks from the beginning has been a real source of frustration for so many. I get that. I feel the same. But given the current advice is that wearing masks will stop an asymptomatic but infectious person spreading the disease, surely it's not too much to ask people to wear a mask when they're shopping or on public transport or otherwise in close proximity to people. And because of that, I want to be very clear, I'm happy enough to wear a mask if it means I can protect an older person, a more vulnerable person, someone like my mum, or someone perhaps who's recovering from chemo or asthma or any other condition which might make them more at risk. Wearing a mask isn't about me, it's about them. And wearing a mask in Australia shouldn't be turned into a political fight either. Just as I was against activists importing America's civil rights history here with a Black Lives Matter protest, I'm just as much against anyone who wants to ignite America's fight about masks here in Australia. In Victoria, we're in this mess, this second lockdown, because the Premier let us all down and bungled quarantine. And other than voting him out of office, which I can't wait to do, if wearing a mask helps us get our freedoms back sooner rather than later, then wearing a mask is the least of our worries in Melbourne.